Hi everyone, it's James here. Welcome to another video, and this evening I am delighted to be joined by a very special guest all the way from up north. We have Ross Goodall. Hi Ross.
Hey James, great to be on your channel.
Yeah, well thanks for joining me. Ross and I have been going back and to a little bit trying to decide on an album to talk about.
Yeah, a little bit. I was kind of keen to talk about someone who an artist who I know and love, and I guess there's no one who I know and love more than Paul McCartney. So that was yeah. But I think it was a joint decision, the album, but came to review. Yeah.
Yeah, so we're going to be talking about this one. So I've got a CD of it. I know you've got multiple versions of it
Oh,
there. You've
I've
got
got tons of versions of it, but
archive
yeah.
edition. Yeah, yeah. So Flowers in the Dirt, you mentioned to me that it might be interesting talking about this one in the sense that I was there when it came out, so I can remember it in real time. Whereas you yourself, as a younger person, obviously you'll have a slightly different history with it, and that should be interesting. So why don't you go first? Why don't you explain how does Flowers in the Dirt sort of enter the picture for you? Was it one that you heard first or later or whatever? I mean, where did it fall?
Yeah, I think it was probably one I heard round like the middle of me kind of getting into Paul McCartney. Like then again, all kind of came at once a little bit. Like the first album I heard of his was like Memory Almost Full, came free with like a Sunday newspaper. Like so like my dad had that one. It was the only McCartney CD he had, and kind of like and but this point like already knew the Beatles, so kind of making that connection between this was the same guy who was in the Beatles. That was like and then he still released really good music. So that one kind of spurred me to kind of go back through his whole catalogue. But I think I've not got any real particular memories attached to listening to this album for like the first time. I think it was just another McCartney album for me a little bit.
Okay, okay. Yeah, I mean that's really interesting knowing that you started with Memory Almost Full
Mm-hmm.
because I mean, to me as a sort of prehistoric person, that one almost seems like it was released yesterday, whereas Flowers in the
Yeah.
Dirt, it's just so long ago. I mean, I was just checking the dates. So it came out on the 5th of June, 1989,
Mm-hmm.
and it was his eighth solo album. And I was just trying to do my dates and my maths. I went to uni in October of 89. And what this album really reminds me of is finishing my A levels. And and it was a beautiful summer. I can remember just having this new Paul McCartney album and having no work to do. You know that great feeling you get when you finish your last exam and there's just nothing. The whole summer stretching out ahead of you. I knew I was going to uni, but that was not until October kind of thing. So some really great memories for me. And I just passed my driving test as well. And I was going on holiday with a mate of mine. We were driving down the Welsh coast, and we had his cassette of Flowers in the Dirt with us on this road trip. So in terms of Paul McCartney albums or any albums that I've got in my collection, I can't think of many other albums that have as many positive memories or positive connotations. It really is one of those records for me. But of course, the problem with that is that it makes it very hard to be objective. I don't know if you have this experience. I mean, you're really good at ranking albums and giving your opinions, but I do tend to find sometimes that if there's a particular memory or an attachment to a record, it can make things difficult, to try and be
Yeah.
objective about it.
Yeah, like I'm a bit like that. I mean, like not so much with this album, but maybe perhaps more his more recent stuff. So particularly like when you're talking about like those memories you have with this album. For me, New is the album where I've got a lot of memories. I was in high school when it came out, so again, a lot of like sort of like memories of that. And like same kind of thing with like Egypt Station, like as well. So perhaps with those albums, it's more difficult to be like objective than like a case like this, like looking back
Hmm.
and like maybe like when like you just like yeah, it's a kind of like a kind of distant past release. I think it was like released like 9 years before I was born, basically. So it's a kind of like yeah, it's kind of
You're making me
don't
feel
make me
ill now,
uncomfortable,
Ross. Making me
but
feel.
no.
Okay, okay. Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, we don't need to do anything too historical on it because people will know. Anybody watching this video will know the basic facts of this album. But I suppose I'll start the conversation by saying I think at the time it was perceived, certainly I perceived it as being a bit of a return to form. Press to Play had been disastrous critically. Now, I like that album. I think, would you agree that just in terms of the history, obviously McCartney, he comes out of this rather unsuccessful songwriting collaboration with Eric Stewart from 10cc. It doesn't really work out. And so he decides to go for the big guns. He hires the big guns. He hires Elvis Costello. And Costello, I don't think he was particularly. I suppose he was still a major star in the 80s, but I think his big commercial day had come and gone. But even so, I think it was seen as being a big thing, wasn't it? There was all that talk in the media about how Elvis was quite similar to John Lennon, and there was quite a lot of hype around this album about, oh, Paul's working with a kind of John Lennon collaborator again. When you first got listening to the record, had you heard much Costello before? Were you aware of his work, or did you know anything about that?
Not at all. Absolutely
Oh, right,
nothing.
okay.
I probably couldn't name you like a Costello song. It was like when I first came, like when I first heard it, especially like because the only song like on the album where you can really like tell he's on there, like in terms of singing, like it's like you want her too, and when like he does like that kind of like the call and response line. At first you're like, who's this? Like, it's like who's
Yeah.
this guy singing like with him? Like, but then of course like when like you get to like of course like now I am a big Elvis Costello fan, and like we will probably discuss like in like a bit later. But I think their writing partnership, I think, was really successful. Like in quite stark contrast
Mm.
to like the partnership like you described like with like Eric Stewart. I think like in the case like Eric Stewart, like him and McCartney probably just too similar.
Mm.
Like they were both very much a kind of like the sort of like the melodic ones like in like their respective bands. Whereas because McCartney like and Costello had sort of different strengths like as songwriters, like when like they came together, I think they wrote some really cracking songs.
Mm. It's interesting because I always think with this album that McCartney, he had the choice to make an album with Elvis Costello, and he basically didn't do it.
Yeah.
He kind of, I mean, if you listen to the demos, you can hear the seeds there for a proper McCartney Costello record, which could have been. But it was McCartney's nature, I think, round about this time. Maybe he'd come out of Wings and he didn't want to kind of do anything too, regular with somebody. He wanted to hedge his bets a little bit. I mean, this album is just full of different collaborators, different producers, different musicians. So,
Yeah.
what do you make of that? Do you think that the album would have worked better had he decided to properly jump in with Elvis Costello and go, look, let's just do a McCartney Costello album?
Yeah, like absolutely. I mean, like for me, like in like an alternate universe, that would have been like I think one of my favorite albums. Like so, like off like either artist, like to
Mm,
like be honest, like because I think the songs they wrote together, like were like really good and like had like the strengths of like both
mm,
bag of like both of them like coming together. Like like in terms of like how like so like whether McCartney I think had the choice like to go down that route. I'm really not sure like, if that really was on like the table because like there's some demos like this because we're in this mammoth box there's like the original like acoustic demos which are kind of like the Everly Brothers style like two guitars kind of like so like very rough and ready which I think would have been a great album like in like its own right but then there's 1988 demos they're called here but they're actually like in studio that's so like early run throughs like off like the songs like in like the studio and I think the idea had kind of moved on to to having Costello producing the album, like with McCartney and like producing like the next Paul McCartney album, like rather than them working together. So it kind of like evolved a bit, but then it then got to a point I think where they both, I think, that I just wanted slightly different things like from it. Like, I don't think Costello like was too happy like with like the way that like the arrangements were going. And I think McCartney wanted to do something a bit more poppy, a bit more sort of like
mm.
commercial to get that big comeback album. So he then went to producer Mitchell Froom, who produced Crowded House.
It's not just Mitchell Froom, is it? I mean, there's so many producers.
Oh
Let's
no,
see. We've got
yeah,
Mitch,
there's
Mitchell
nine.
Froom.
There's nine in total.
I've got Mitchell Froom,
Mm.
Neil Dorfsman,
Mm-hmm.
Costello himself, Trevor
Mm-hmm.
Horn, Steve Lipson, who I suppose come as a bit of a team, don't they?
Yeah,
Then
yeah.
you've got Chris Hughes, Ross Cullum, David
Mm-hmm.
Foster. Now, maybe that
Mm-hmm.
does add up to nine when you add
And
it
then
all.
McCartney himself, I think, is listed as producer on some of them. And then I think you've even got George Martin popping up here and there. Like, I think George did the string, put it there. Like,
Right.
so tons of people coming together. I mean, it's a bit of, I guess, in some ways, it's like the same formula like you'd use for like Tug of War. Again, like a little bit kind of pulling in different musicians to do different songs and collaborating with sort of like certain artists, like on certain tracks like but I think he kind of takes it a step further like on this album using completely different producers producers like throughout like at least Tug of War had sort of George Martin kind of bringing it all together whereas on here one of the weaknesses I think is just it's just so scattershot and it's like he's trying to pack too much onto it a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a huge Trevor Horn fan. So for
Mm.
me, it's frustrating. and I'm a Costello fan too. So
Mm.
this album is frustrating because on the one hand, I'm sort of imagining this Costello album, and then on the other, I'm
Mhm.
imagining this incredible Trevor Horn album, and you don't get either of those things.
Yeah.
You get this weird combination. Let me
Mhm.
just let me throw a couple of things out to you because I've got some conversation starters. So okay, so the first one I'm going to ask you is this: was Flowers in the Dirt a massive improvement on Press to Play, as the critics made it out to be, or do you think that it's more nuanced than that, and maybe there's a bit of a sort of spectrum there? It's not like terrible album going into a really great album, or is it? I mean, you might think that. I don't know.
Uh, yeah, like I'd say it is the more nuanced side of that like point. Like, I mean, I do have a soft spot for Press to Play personally, but I can of course see why it wasn't like the commercial success that McCartney perhaps thought it was going to be when he released it. And then of course with this, and I think it was more with this, the combination of him going back out like on like the road as well, what kind of probably led to a lot of that kind of that sort of like talk about this being a massive comeback album, like his best since Band on the Run and all that kind of chat, like because that's simply because that this was the first tour he'd done since the Wings Over America tour, basically. Like, so I think that was a big deal, and I think it's probably what for like a lot of like people like they like probably made this album a bigger deal than it otherwise would have been. Like if he just released it like Press to Play, like done a few singles, and then that was that kind of thing.
Yeah, well, there was that famous quote, wasn't there, where he said about Press to Play after that had flopped. He said he then needed to do an album, and the quote he came out with was, "I needed to make an album that I could tour with."
Yeah,
And he said, so the last thing I wanted was some crummy album dogging the tour. That was the quote. I always felt sorry
yeah,
for Eric Stewart, imagining what he must have made of that. What an awful indictment of their work together. But you're
yeah,
absolutely right. But it's strange because it's such a studio album, Flowers in the Dirt. I mean, it's not saddled with quite as much 80s production as Press to Play, but it's still definitely a studio album. If you compare it to, say, the next one, which was Off the Ground, that sounds more like a live album. It's more like a live band playing. Same band nearly.
yeah,
But he did use Flowers in the Dirt as the launch pad for this extraordinary
yeah,
comeback. And one thing I suppose we should mention, this idea that he was starting to kind of reconnect with his Beatles past, really, with this album and with the tour
yeah,
in a big way. I mean, the tour, I mean, I saw that tour in 1990, and I can always remember the opening few minutes of the show was just basically a huge film montage of Beatles clips,
mhm,
and then he came on, and it was really significant. And I think him teaming up with Costello maybe had something to do with that. I don't know whether Costello inspired him to do that or whether he was already heading in that direction. But on this album, you've got that really well-known story of Costello persuading McCartney to get his Hofner bass out again,
mhm,
which he hadn't used in years, and it still had the set list taped to the side of it from the Shea Stadium show or something crazy like that.
yeah,
And when they wrote My Brave Face together, Costello started doing all these very Beatlesy harmonies, and McCartney was a bit uncomfortable at first, wasn't he? He kind of thought, "Oh, this is too much like a Beatles pastiche," he called it.
mhm,
But I guess that might be one reason why this album was so critically revered, or at least it was held up at the time as being this big comeback. Maybe
yeah,
because there was the perception that McCartney had voyaged out too far away from what he was known for with Press to Play and whatever, Broad
mhm,
Street, all these
mhm,
flops. And now
yeah.
he's with Costello, John Lennon-y type collaborator. Is that your reading of the situation?
Yeah, like absolutely. I think, I mean, like, so, like, I think I could certainly see Press to Play and probably this, All the Best, what came out in 1987, being that kind of like the end of that chapter, the kind
Yeah,
of like the uncool, uncredible, sort of like 80s Paul, like, sort of like
yeah.
very much a bit naff, basically, like, sort of like a lot of like critics thought of him as. And this album, like, is to start like off like a new chapter for him, essentially embracing like his Beatles past. And I think kind of becoming, I guess, the Paul that we still have today. Like in like a lot of ways, you're like you're kind of like the torchbearer for like all things
Mm,
like Beatles. I've got like this fantastic songbook here. I might as well do
mm,
them. But I think you could be right there and say like Costello getting him to sort of like embrace that Beatles past, sort of like in terms of the songs they were writing, but also
mm.
I sort of like encouraging him to pick up like his Hofner bass again. It was probably we probably got onto something there. Yeah.
I totally get what you're saying about McCartney's naff 80s period. I
Hmm.
mean, you're talking about the frog chorus, you're talking about just things that were just made him
It's
really
like
naff.
colours and yeah.
Rupert the Bear and everything. But
Yeah.
if you talk to a lot of casual music fans now, there's a lot of fondness for that era of McCartney because he was still having big hits. He was still, Pipes of Peace, for all its faults, it was a big hit single, and he was still having big hit records. And really, Flowers in the Dirt, it does start a new chapter, but it marks the moment when he kind of, I think, almost gives up being a contemporary pop star who's trying to say, team up with Michael Jackson or trying to team up with, young people. I mean, Costello was quite long in the tooth by 1980, whatever it was,
Yeah.
nine. He was not a young guy anymore, and he was
No. And the
not
hits
past
had
his,
dried up for him as
and the
well.
hits had
Yeah.
absolutely dried up. So it didn't feel like McCartney was being, I don't think, as competitive as he could have been being. I mean, he was probably about 50 at this point. My maths is not great, but maybe he did
Yeah.
feel moving into my 50s, it's time to now be the elder statesman or to begin
Mm.
walking down that path. My assessment of Flowers in the Dirt, as much as I love it, I just don't necessarily think it's got the pop. What's the word? The pop nous of some of the stuff he was doing in the 80s during the period that you correctly identify as his
Possibly.
naff period,
Yeah.
big radio hits that just casual fans could tune into. There's nothing particularly on Flowers in the Dirt, I don't think, to appeal to just casual pop fans. It sounds more like an album for Paul McCartney fans and for Beatles
100%.
fans.
I think it's quite interesting when you say like I mean because he was having big hits like right up essentially up to this point like his last top 10 hit was like Once Upon a Long Ago from like
Mm.
the All the Best like so it was kind of interesting if to kind of plot his sort of commercial success that's like really high and then that kind of essentially started to nosedive a little bit with this album but critical success was rubbish throughout most of the 80s but then sort of started to pick up a little bit like with this album so it's just quite interesting how he he kind of struggled a little bit to get both sort of commercial success, but like kind of like when I say commercial success, I mean like singles wise, sort of having consistent top five singles. That's like he struggled to combine that with being sort of someone who was like critically like credible, basically. Yeah.
I was trying to see what was the chart placing that My Brave
So
Face got.
Um, yeah,
Do you
so
know?
My Brave Face here was the first single. It got to number 18 in the
Okay.
UK. Like outperformed like the three singles from Press to Play. None of those were top 20. So it was like an improvement like on that, but it was nowhere near the singles from Tug of War or like Pipes of Peace.
No, and the album did get to number one though
It did in the UK, but
in
in
the UK.
America, yeah, but in the America, like only got to number 21, which is always a thought that kind of puzzled
Mm.
me a little bit. You kind of think you kind of think in the UK at least it's this big kind of comeback album, but again, like America, it maybe was just a bit more of a slow burner, perhaps.
Mm. Okay, so what we're going to do now, we're going to talk about our top five favorite tracks on the record. So, Ross, do you want to give us your number five, and we'll see if I have it on my list.
Yeah, sure. So as I said, a little bit tricky there. So aside from like the top two, but I've gone for number five there, Figure of Eight, one of the singles from the album. I just always had a bit of a soft spot for this song. I know it's not one of the more highly regarded songs, but I think it's just a decent upbeat. I won't call it a rocker, but it's verging on one. I just quite like the song. I thought it was quite a good show opener for like the associated tour. And I quite like, although like I do prefer the single mix of it. I think the album mix it's as vocal like isn't 100%, but single version or like the live version really found myself like getting like into the song like whenever it's on.
Mm. Well, that's really interesting because my number five actually is Figure of Eight, would you believe? So, yeah, I do have a memory of it opening the show that he did, and it was a bit anticlimactic. I mentioned before about the opening film montage. So you heard strains of, Hard Day's Night and all these great Beatles songs, and then they come on and they launch into Figure of Eight, and it was definitely there's a slight sense of like, slight come down. So this one, I think this one is really enjoyable. I never skip it. When it comes on, I'm always pleased to hear it. It's not one of those McCartney songs where you just think, oh God, it's this one. So I pretty much agree with you. I think you're right. I think he doesn't quite nail the vocal, and I think the performance is a bit mannered. And it could have done with maybe having Joe English and Jimmy McCulloch on it, maybe in order to give it a bit of a
Yeah.
swagger. There's no swagger to it. It sounds like a studio concoction. So this is one
Yeah.
of the many songs on the album where I have an issue.
Mhm.
Now, what was my issue with this one? I'm sure I've written all these down. I've just right. Yeah. So I've said it putters out, meaning
Yeah, the ending's not great, is it?
no, it just sort of falls apart. I mean, even a really nice, classy fade out would have been nice, but it just literally just falls apart. And you're
Yeah.
thinking, well, it's not particularly great. So anyway,
Yeah, but like I do think like the single mix and like the live version kind of corrects like those
I
things. It makes it a bit more punchy and also gives it a slightly better ending as well. So
I agree
yeah.
totally. Yeah, okay. All right, well, I'll do my number four. And this is one that might be higher on your list, and it could have come higher on my list, but I've actually got My Brave Face at number four. So this one clearly is the first track on the record. It's the big Costello McCartney pop song. And I do think it bursts out of the speakers with a certain degree of confidence. I do like the opening track on Press to Play, Stranglehold, I think is a decent song. But this is clearly more commercial. I think the bass playing is fantastic on it. I think it's got really beautiful pop songwriting hooks. You can clearly hear the quality. They've gone to town on it. I don't really have many reservations with this one, other than again, it suffers slightly from that. I don't know if you call it a blandness or just it lacks some kind of thing that maybe Jimmy McCulloch and Joe English might have brought to the table. Maybe a bit smooth, a bit clean,
Mhm.
but that's griping really.
Yeah, I mean, like, I'll just say this was my favorite. This was my number one
Okay.
choice, and it is, I think, a top draw McCartney single. I think it's one of my favorite songs off his, to be frankly honest, and I think it's that combination of him. I guess probably for the first time, almost like as a solo artist, like he does it tons now. The first time it's okay, really going for that Beatles sound, like like he hadn't really done that. Like up to like this point, and of course, he would do that again on like albums like Flaming Pie and Chaos Inflation, like one of. But this is the first time he was really going for a kind of Beatlesy kind of vibe to it, and I think it's got some great lyrics, maybe as well. Probably mostly courtesy like of Elvis Costello,
Hmm.
but it's got some great lines that are very candid lines. Like now that I'm alone again, I can't stop breaking down again. The simplest things set me off again. Take me to that place where I can find my brave face. Another great lines about like clearing away another uncooked TV dinner from
Hmm.
from the table I leave for. I think it's got some great lines on it, and yeah, for me, yeah, one of my
Hmm.
favorite McCartney singles. So that's just spoiler there, my number one.
To be honest with you, I'm looking at my list here, and I should probably have put that number three because the song I've got at number three, I probably don't like it as much as My Brave Face. But hey ho, it's too late to change now.
Yeah,
So do you want to do your number four, and we'll see?
yeah. Yeah, stand up four. I'm staying pretty boring with another one of the singles, but put it there to be my number four. Again, it's a song which I often overlook. Like, it's not a McCartney song which I necessarily would go to, or say I'm making a playlist or whatever, it's like of the best songs of that or my favorites. Not necessarily what I would put on, but when I listen to the album, it always just really stands out for me as just a really nice, very charming, very pleasant song. And I think we all know the kind of like the origins of it based on a kind of saying of like his father's like put it there like if it weighs a ton and that. So it's a very nice charming song about the kind of like father son like relationship and that. But really I enjoy it. So yeah, that'd be
Hmm.
my number four.
Well, I've got that one higher than you. I've got it at number two.
Okay.
And I think possibly viewed objectively, I'd say maybe it's the best song on the album in terms of
Mm.
the sentiment that it conveys. It's very direct, it's very honest in a way that McCartney sometimes isn't. He's fond of writing those sort of third person songs, story songs. I mean, this one, it's sort of the Here Today of the album, isn't it? I mean, it's not the same kind of song because Here Today is obviously it's extremely emotional song. This one is emotional, but I don't know, I think charming is a good word for it.
Mm.
I like the way he plays the drums on his
Yeah,
knees. That's, I think it was an old Buddy Holly thing, wasn't it? It was an old
yeah,
trick from the
yeah.
50s.
Like sort of Peggy Sue kind of style. Yeah.
Yeah, and the lyric is just very, very nicely done. And it's the sort of song he could have buggered up really badly. I mean, he does bugger up a few songs on this record really badly. He could have done it to this song, and he
Yeah.
doesn't. And so I think it's to be
I
applauded
kind
for
of think
that.
you've got George Martin on there as well. I think doing like the orchestration. I certainly again like the archive book. There's a picture of George and like the kind of like the sessions and that. So he's obviously brought
Yeah,
him back. I think we probably knew this was a decent song and deserved the kind of a really good, really nice arrangement.
I'm going to go with this one at number
Okay.
three,
Mm-hmm.
which I always loved back in the day. To me, it was a standout track at the time. When the album first came out, I remember me and my friend on that road trip when we were, driving with the roof back of the car. Lovely summer's day. It was the best song on the album for that. It was
Mm-hmm.
so uplifting. It was so joyful. I probably like it a bit less now as time has gone by. So once again, I think it suffers slightly from that sort of slightly studio bland sheen. Something not quite exciting enough about it, but not too bad. The drawback I have for this one, and again, it's to do with the end of the song, I just think it lacks a magnificent ending. It goes into this kind of minor key thing towards the end. The swan is riding. It just goes into this minor, quite dour sounding outro that just sort of fades out. And I'm left thinking of songs like Every Breath You Take by not Every Breath You Take. What's the Police song? Every Little Thing She Does Is Magic,
Yeah.
which just rides out on this fantastic outro, getting more and more kind of jubilant and wonderful. And this song really doesn't do that. It seems to lose heart towards the end. He just seems to kind of go, all right, okay, let's just finish this song now in some which way form. So that's my take on it. I still think it's a good song.
Yeah, and I probably like agree with like what you said there. I mean, it's my number two choice.
Okay.
Like so, and again, it's one of the songs that for me was an easy choice for the album. I think again, it's a highlight. It's what I would pick out as a real favorite. I think what you said about it, like the summery vibe to it, I think is like spot on. It's got yeah, maybe not quite as overt as My Brave Face, but it's got a kind of 60s kind of pop feel to it, like which hadn't really again done much since. It's got very kind of jangly like instrumentation on it, all these kind of 12-string Rickenbackers going on. I think it sounds great, and it was also like another top 20 hit, reached number 18, same place as Bad Face, and I think it was one of his last appearances on Top of the Pops as well. He did with this one like back in like the day, like so. But no, I really like it. Again, I like how it builds up, but absolutely like, agree with you. Like, my one gripe with it is the outro kind of shoehorned onto the end of the song. It just doesn't really add anything. It gets to the point I love the song so much, like the actual like the core of the song, but then we get to this almost just feel like skipping it a little bit. It's a real
Yeah.
shame.
It had a really good video, and it was one of those songs where
Yeah,
it came on and you were proud to be a McCartney fan again. There was a
yeah.
definite sense of like, oh, right, here he is, after how many years of waiting for him to come on with a really, really nice
Yeah.
McCartney-ish Beatlesy song. And it's the kind of song that I could imagine, George Harrison liking. I don't know whether he ever actually said anything about it, but I can imagine George and Ringo, giving it a bit of a thumbs up and going, yeah, yeah, good one, Macca. So is it my turn to do number one, or is it your turn to do number three?
Oh, I don't know. That's lost track.
Right, I'll do my number one. I don't know whether you'll have this one or not. This is a song which I love it so much. I don't think necessarily it's a song which gets a huge amount of love or praise out there in McCartney land, but it's one that I loved at the time, and it's one of the songs on the album that never grows old for me. And it is "We Got Married."
Okay.
Now, there's a couple of reasons for this. I think one reason is in the late 80s, I was a major Pink Floyd fan.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they were the first band I ever saw live. I saw the Momentary Lapse of Reason tour, and maybe between 87 and say 89, I mean, Floyd, where I liked them, easily my favorite band.
Mm-hmm.
So when Gilmour turns up playing this really magnificent guitar, and what I love about it is that it's not sort of Pink Floyd guitar. It's not his usual. I mean, Dave Gilmour can be a bit tiresome with all the fret burning. He doesn't do that. He just plays this very sort of stately solo with chords. It's mainly chords, but it's so majestic.
Yeah.
And I know it's a sort of overblown AOR thing. It's got a bit of Baker Street about it. It's got a bit of sort of late 70s. I don't know. It's just for me, it taps into a strain of British pop music I always loved, sort of atmospheric, bluesy. Dave Gilmour's on it, and I just like the lyric. I like the fact that he brought in. Was it a John Lennon thing where he said to John, didn't he, when he was trying to fix his marriage with Yoko? McCartney said to John, "It's not just a loving machine. what's the
Right.
quote?
Love machine if you don't work at it or something like that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was when John and Yoko were going through a bad patch, and Paul took. Well, this is what Paul always says. I mean, I don't know whether you can believe half the stories that Paul comes out with, but the story is that he took John to one side and said, you have to work at a marriage. It's not just a loving machine.
Mhm.
So again, when I hear that lyric, that always touches a nerve. And I just like the sentiment of it. It's a very simple song lyrically. It's just we had nothing, we got married, we were glad we got married, found a flat after that, we got married. I love the simplicity of it matched with this really majestic musical backing. So that's why I've got it at
Yeah.
number one.
Yeah, that was a borderline one for that. Like that was like my number six. Really interesting to note as well that song. He'd had it kicking about since 1984. It was the same sessions that he did "No More Lonely Nights" and that like Gilmore contributed like the guitar to this. So just the fact that he kind of sat on this, like this is better than being 90% of the stuff on Press to Play. That he kind of just sat on this song for so long.
I think it sounds like, of all the songs on the album, it sounds like the one that he's really gone to town on the arrangement. I mean, we talked a lot about these songs that sort of putter out or do something at the end, which doesn't quite work. Whereas on this track, it seems like he's really plotted it out. He's got Guy Barker on trumpet, comes in towards the end doing this beautiful trumpet thing.
Yeah.
And again, it's got that slight Jerry Rafferty thing, which I'm a complete sucker for. Anyway, so that's my number one. So, so we've done our five, haven't we?
Well, I've not done my number three. I
Oh,
don't
right.
think.
Okay, go on then. Go on then.
Yeah, yeah. My number three is "That Day Is Done."
Okay, I nearly had that. Nearly.
Yeah. Which I think is a great lyric. I mean, mostly again, this is one of the songs that I think Costello's talked about this song a lot, and I think it is arguably more of a Costello song. I read that it was written about his that Costello's like grandmother's funeral and that, so it's got these very kind of stately like lyrics to it. And I think I've read Costello's book, and I think I think he regrets a little bit giving this one to McCartney because he performs this one live quite a bit, but I think McCartney does a great job of it. Though I mean, I think the vocal delivery is like on point. It sings it really soulfully. I mean, it's a very kind of similar song to, I mean, dare I say, like "Let It Be" in terms of like its style and the way it's like delivered. Of course, it's not on the same level, but it's coming from that kind of like place in that. But yeah, it's just always a song which again I perhaps overlook a little bit, but whenever it's on, I always just I'm always like really impressed with it. So yeah, it's my number one.
It's slightly buried on the album, isn't it? It's kind of, is it three songs before the end or something like that? It's in a strange position. It's not sort of early. It's not at the end. It's just kind of, it just happens at some point. So before we finish, I want to just run something past you because clearly we haven't talked about all the songs, have we? And I want to just run something past you. So Andrew Dixon here on the YouTube community, Big Beatles channel, his line about Flowers in the Dirt is basically great album, falls off a cliff towards the end. And I think that probably reflects what you might describe with the kind of broad consensus view of the record, that it's kind of front loaded a little bit, tapers off towards the end. So let's
rather like mid loaded, I think like that run of songs, We Got Married, Put It There, Figure of Eight, and this one, I think is a great full run of songs that probably rivals any McCartney album. But yeah, certainly I get what you're saying. Like, yeah, it's kind of is front loaded with the better songs. Yeah. Well, it goes We Got Married, Put It There, Figure of Eight, this one, then Don't Be Careless, Love.
Oh, it's interrupted by Don't Be Careless.
Which again, like I quite like again, like that's another one like the co-writes. I quite like the demo of it, but I think again, that's which is overproduced and overblown. It just kind of throws everything like in the kitchen sink at like on like the album, and then we get That Day Is Done, which brings it up a notch again. Yeah.
I mean, I've never minded Careless Love. I mean, I've written next to it Fussy Production again.
But and again, I think the vocal's not brilliant, especially on the verses. He's very strained kind of vocal performance. He wouldn't dare like do that now, like on like an album, but it is quite strange, like on like the verse. Like it's an interesting song, but yeah, like not one I'm particularly too fond of.
I think once you get into Flowers in the Dirt and then you get to Off the Ground and then Flaming Pie, I think his voice is basically in a very long, slow decline. Then it's going to take a few albums for it really starts to get. But I think on Flowers in the Dirt, there are some moments where you think that song, if he'd done that song 5 years ago, it would have sounded fantastic. But you know, vocally, he's just not quite got it anymore. You know, now, the final two songs on the record, I sort of buck the trend here a little bit in the sense that I actually quite like them both. I don't dislike how many people I put pleasant but lightweight, and then I put Motor of Love, obviously lyrically weak, but I quite like the sort of Cars production, the kind of it's got a bit of 10cc going on, hasn't it? The sort of soft vocal harmonies. It's pleasant to listen to. It's got a nice sound to it. Both of those tracks, I think, sound quite nice. They're not nasty to listen to. What do you make of them?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a kind of tale of two songs there, a bit for me. How many people I would say I dislike it is probably like it is the weakest song like on the album for me. If we're counting that the original vinyls, I counting like the CD versions, Ue Le Soleil, which is on all the CDs, is even worse. Like, but how many people? Not a song I've
Oh
ever.
no, I love Ule Soleil, and
Oh, really?
I was gonna say that to the end and ask you, should Motor of Love come off and Ue Le Soleil should have gone
Oh
on?
no, no. Oh no, no,
I
no,
love
no.
Ule Soleil. I absolutely love it.
Like even when I was
Yeah.
young and getting into the album, I don't know, it's just not my cup of tea really. But yeah, no, how do people not like not brilliant? But Motor of Love, I actually quite like. It could have definitely done with a bit of editing. It's a nice song, but it doesn't sit too well like on the album because he got like the two guys who produced it, I think they worked with Tears for Fears, hadn't they? But like I quite like it again. As you say, I like the atmospheric production on it. I think it's a nice song. I think McCartney's vocals decent on it, like as well.
Brilliant. Okay, so in conclusion, then, now have you reviewed this album on your channel? I can't remember.
I think I probably have going back
Right.
a few years, possibly. I mean, I can't remember
So,
like what score I gave it out of 100% or whatever, but I would imagine it probably would have been either like late 70s, early 80s. I'm quite generous like with like the scoring, like to be honest. I probably would have been about like 75%, I'd imagine, but yeah, I can't say for sure.
I was just going to say I would give this album 75%. It's an album that could have been a total disaster. It was definitely not that. I do think it's an album that could have been better had you made a few different choices, but hey ho, it's easy to cast judgment in that sense. Great. All right then. Well, thank you very much for that, Ross. We both ended up with 75%, and
Yeah.
that's that's quite nice. So yeah, thanks for joining me for this one. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, no worries. I've had a good time. Yeah.
Cool. Do let us know what you think of the record. Drop some comments below whether you think Flowers in the Dirt is a classic McCartney album or perhaps one of his weaker ones. I know it does sort of divide opinion. It's not universally regarded anymore, I don't think, but it'll be interesting to find out what people think. So yeah, thanks, Ross, and we shall bid you farewell. Take care. Bye.
Bye.